Okay, so third time's the charm. I'm sure for whatever reason YouTube would not accept the upload of this video the first and second time I've tried it. So I'm sure this will be the time that it actually sticks. I want to say that I appreciate your being so patient. I just haven't been able to kick whatever this bug is that I have, and it's really playing havoc with my schedule. As you can imagine, things this time of year are real tight. Everything has a deadline, and as a result, it's just been very difficult for me to get this information out to you. Your midterm exam will consist of some 25 true, false, and multiple choice questions. Take as much time as you need to complete the exam. My inability to get this out to you in a timely manner will not affect your getting this material, getting this done, this test done, going through the material and getting the test done. So you take as much time as you need. I know we've got spring break next week. I'm not asking you to participate in taking this exam over the course of spring break. I just wanted to make sure that you had it now and that you had the opportunity to take it when, in fact, you had the time to do it. Email me in the event that you have any questions at semcgee.alaska.edu. Good luck, and we'll get started. So in no particular order, we'll cover the following items. For starters, this idea of cyber terrorism and its impact upon the transportation industry as a whole. If you take a moment to look back at lesson 1, you're going to see that cyber terrorism and hacking really do present a huge threat to the transportation industry as a whole. And then even more specifically, if you remember, there was one article that addressed the nature of cyber terrorism and hacking and how it could affect the aviation industry more specifically. So keep that in mind, this idea that cyber terrorism is very much a real threat to the transportation industry, largely because it's open networks, all kinds of great stuff like that, and most specifically the aviation industry. In a lot of your urban areas, you're going to have these transportation professionals. They're part of emergency management teams. You know, those are the experts, so to speak, when it comes to matters associated with transportation. And they have a seat at the table, they participate in drills, those kinds of things. But the potential for transportation in general, and in particular, to play a more significant role in emergency response and evacuation is really far from being fully realized. We're just not there yet. These folks are kind of an afterthought, these transportation professionals. So someday when you're responsible for the overall emergency management for a given community, make sure that you have your transportation professionals, you provided them a seat at the table, because they're going to be a huge source of information for you when it comes to emergency response and evacuations. You can imagine our transportation systems as they currently exist. They're essential infrastructures for economic vitality, growth, and well-being throughout a given country. Essential components of economic vitality, growth, and well-being throughout a country. When we talk about transportation systems, what exactly do they include? Our transportation system happens to be made up of airports and shipping ports or water ports, highways, tunnels, and bridges, and also passenger and freight trains, all components of our transportation system. You can imagine then how attractive of a target our transportation network is to terrorists. It's a soft target. It offers terrorists relatively uncomplicated access and easily penetrated security measures. Why is that? Well, because in a large way, or a large part, we have yet to have been able to secure our surface transportation systems in much the same way that we secured our aviation transportation, our aviation security model in the wake of 9/11. We just can't lock down the travel on our roadways and the travel on railways in the same way that we seem to have been able to have locked down transportation within the airline industry. It's going to be a hard road to travel, no pun intended, and it will remain somewhat of an attractive target to terrorists as a result of this difficulty. Transit agencies, the folks who are responsible for our transportation industry, and security authorities have to consider this trade-off, okay? And there's this constant balancing act that takes place. And you end up with factoring in security, mobility, and freedom. And the opposing force in this balancing act is the expected negative effect of an attack. This is a tough balance. We could have a completely secure aviation industry, let's say, where, as shocking as this may sound, you arrive 4 hours prior to your departure. There's a thorough background screening conducted as to you, the traveler. You are then stripped of all clothing, handcuffed, placed on the plane, flown in that way to your destination. We could come up with a completely safe industry, but we would sacrifice freedom, security, and mobility in an effort to completely negate the effects of an attack. And the American people, or anybody for that matter, would be unwilling to accept such compromises. How about the bad guy? Let's say the radical Islamist. Where do they get their motivation? Islamic terrorism takes into account its religious roots, the rulings of Islamic law in the form of Sharia, and the outline of Islamic legal experts, the opinions of these Islamic legal experts in the form of what are known as fatwas. So recapping there, Islamic terrorism takes into account its religious roots, the rulings of Islamic law, and the outline of Islamic legal experts. Our maritime industry, in regard to terrorism, is of concern. It's a worrisome contingency, so to speak, due to the fact that you've got this vast and largely global network, that it's unregulated for all intents and purposes, and it's difficult to see through. It's kind of opaque in its nature. The maritime terrorist threat is a worrisome contingency due to its vast and largely global network, its unregulation, it's being unregulated, and it's being opaque in nature. The U.S. government has spent over $90 billion on border security efforts without really having a truly objective way to measure success, or even, worst case scenario, to acknowledge failures. We're spending a lot of money, and we're not really sure if it's working or not. Terrorism, transnational crime, and illegal immigration are now three main issues and controversies surrounding U.S. border security efforts. And they largely explain why securing our borders has become more important now than any other time in history. When we talk about securing a border, it really doesn't mean that we need to keep 100% of everyone and everything from coming across it. That'd be physically impossible. To do so would result in the bankrupting of many countries, both from both the attempt to create barriers and from the loss of cross-border trade and cultural exchange. Terrorists, associates of terrorist groups, those who actively support terrorism, drug traffickers, human traffickers, smugglers, and violent criminals are our enemies when it comes to our borders. We have to learn to focus the vast majority of our border security efforts and apparatus on preventing these types of individuals from even attempting to enter our country. Everybody gets so caught up in terrorists coming illegally over our borders. One thing I want to make sure is, yes, that's very important. We should focus on that. I've told you several times now that is one particular group that we need to focus our border security efforts upon, terrorists. But don't turn a blind eye to other mechanisms by which a terrorist could arrive in our country. Keep in mind that the 9/11 hijackers and the Christmas Day underwear bomber all had U.S. visas that were issued at U.S. consulates, traveled legally to the United States on legitimately purchased plane tickets. Kind of adopt this all hazards approach to securing our nation. Americans need to understand that while making a border 100% secure is in fact an impossible task, it actually is possible to identify who our enemies really are and to develop a strategy that ensures that we focus our limited resources on preventing those enemies from entering our country unnoticed. The better we understand the concept of border security and all its moving parts, the better we can hold our leaders accountable when they spend our tax dollars on resources that aren't needed or fail to spend them on resources that are critical and engage in acts of fear-mongering or hollow reassurances designed to placate voters. In the last 15 years, the number of apprehensions on the southwest border, which is considered to date a major indicator of the total attempts to cross the border illegally, has declined significantly. You wouldn't know it from reading the papers, but it has in fact, and we know it has because we've been reading up on this all throughout the semester to date. It's now less than 1/3 of what it was in the year 2000, and it's at its lowest level since the 1970s. So significant strides there in reductions of the number of apprehensions at the southwest border. The U.S.-Canada and the U.S.-Mexico borders are the two biggest and busiest land crossings in the world. And they are literally, or at least the volume of traffic at these locations, are part of the problem when it comes to establishing a secure border. Recently, a report was released that showed that the economic impacts of breaches of maritime security amounted to an estimated $12 billion impact to the shipping industry annually. That's an estimate. It's a good number for you to know. The recent spike in Somali piracy can be traced to political instability in the region, the decimation of fishing grounds by foreign vessels, the dumping of toxic waste in Somali waters, and the existence of extreme poverty in the region. As I indicated just in that last slide, piracy in Somalia is a multifaceted problem that the warships of an international community alone cannot solve. Solving the problem will literally mean addressing the various facets of piracy, namely those that are geopolitical, regional, legal, and operational. Here's something to be concerned about. The increase in the numbers of insurgents in Somalia is of great concern, particularly with regards to the fight against terrorism. If careful and thoughtful tactics aren't employed, there is a great probability that Somalia could fall into the hands of al-Shabaab and become a haven for terrorists. If we aren't careful, the exact same environment that allowed for the spike in piracy could contribute to its becoming a breeding ground for terrorists. You should be getting this common theme here. Last slide, where I tell you things like the issue of piracy in Somalia is a complex one involving economics and politics, and not one where the mere presence of a multinational coalition of warships can ensure for the safety of sailors in the region. There you have it. 25 questions, 25 slides, including the introduction. So I covered a couple of points there, but that should not be a problem for you, okay? If there are issues, you know how to get in touch with me. I'll talk to you later.